This is not a story as he tells it. It's the story of what happened when God went quiet. His name doesn't matter. What matters is what he prayed for. For years, he believed prayer worked, until the night it didn't. That night, he asked God one simple question, and heaven said nothing. No peace, no answer, not even anger. Just silence, so loud it hurt. The kind of silence that makes you doubt everything you believed. He checked the clock. 3:17 a.m., the hour when faith feels furthest away. Then he prayed again, softer this time, almost afraid of his own voice. Still nothing, not even the comfort of an echo. He tried to remember when God last felt close. Days? Weeks? Time loses meaning when you're waiting for heaven to respond. His faith had always been simple. Talk to God. God answers. But that equation was broken. He wondered if he'd done something wrong, said the wrong words, prayed at the wrong time. By morning, something had changed. Not around him, inside him. A crack had formed. Small, barely noticeable, but it was there. He went through the motions. Work, coffee, small talk, but inside he was screaming. Screaming at a God who seemed to have walked away. Or maybe he was never there at all. For the first time in his life, he wondered if God had left, or worse, if he'd imagined him all along. That thought terrified him more than the silence itself. Because if God was imaginary, then every prayer he'd ever prayed was just him talking to himself. Every answered prayer, coincidence. Every moment of peace, just brain chemistry. That was the thought he couldn't escape. The question that haunted every moment. That was the night heaven went silent. Or so he thought. What he didn't know was that silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's preparation. Sometimes it's protection. And sometimes it's the only language left when words have failed. But he didn't know that yet. All he knew was the silence. And it was drowning him. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Prayers unanswered. Questions multiplying. He stopped talking to other believers. What could he say? That God abandoned him? That his faith was crumbling and he couldn't stop it? No. He smiled, nodded, lied. He stopped praying out loud. The words felt like throwing rocks into an empty well, never hearing them hit bottom, never knowing if anyone heard. Not because he stopped believing entirely, but because he was afraid. Afraid of hearing nothing again. Afraid that silence was his only answer. That's when the doubts arrived. Not suddenly, slowly, like ink spreading through water, staining everything. What if God only listens when things are easy, when faith is convenient? What if he only shows up when you don't really need him? What if faith was just hope pretending to be strong? These thoughts came at night, always at night, when defenses were down, when loneliness spoke loudest. He remembered every prayer God had answered before, the small ones, the desperate ones, the miracles that kept him believing. And then he remembered every one God didn't answer, the prayers that fell silent, the hopes that died, the faith that felt betrayed. That's when he understood. Silence wasn't the problem. Memory was. Because he kept comparing God now to God then, and now was losing. He was judging today's silence by yesterday's answers. And that was a trap. What if God wasn't absent? What if he was just waiting for him to stop demanding answers and start trusting in silence? That thought terrified him, because trust feels like giving up, like admitting you were never in control to begin with. But maybe that was the point. Maybe faith isn't about getting God to speak. Maybe it's about learning to hear differently. That night, something unexpected happened. The silence changed. Not louder, not clearer, just different. He felt it first in his chest, a softening, then in his shoulders. They dropped, just a little. The weight he didn't know he was carrying began to lift. He realized something. Silence was a rejection. It was space. Space to breathe. Space to be. Space to stop performing his faith and start living it. For years, he'd been shouting prayers. Now, he was learning to whisper. For years, he'd been demanding signs. Now he was learning to see them. They were everywhere. In the sunrise, he'd stopped noticing. In the kindness of strangers. In the breath he took without thinking. Signs he'd been too loud to hear. Too desperate to see. God hadn't gone silent. He'd always been whispering. But you can't hear whispers when you're screaming. That night, he didn't demand a miracle. He just said, "Thank you. Thank you for the silence that taught him to trust. Thank you for the absence that made him search. Thank you for the waiting that taught him patience." And something extraordinary happened. Peace arrived, not because his circumstances changed. They hadn't, not because God finally answered. He hadn't, at least not the way he expected. Peace came because he stopped fighting the silence and started listening to it. He learned that silence doesn't mean no. Sometimes it means wait. Sometimes it means grow. And sometimes it means you're not ready for the answer yet. He thought about all the prayers God didn't answer and realized maybe he was the answer. Maybe God was silent because he needed to move, not God. Maybe heaven was waiting for earth to do its part. That changed everything. Prayer wasn't a vending machine. Insert coin, receive blessing. It was a relationship. And relationships require more than words. They require trust when you don't understand. Presence when answers aren't clear. Love when silence feels like rejection. He'd been treating God like a genie. Now, he was learning to know him as a father. And fathers don't always explain, but they're always there. That realization broke him in the best possible way. He wept, not from pain, but from relief. Relief that he didn't have to understand everything. He just had to trust someone who did. The next morning, nothing had changed, and everything had changed. His circumstances were the same, but he wasn't. He went to work. Same job, same desk, same problems. But he carried them differently now. He started noticing things, small things, the way light hit his coffee cup, the sound of rain he used to curse, the stranger who held the door. God was speaking. He always had been, just not in the language of answers, in the language of presence. That night, he prayed again, but this time was different. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand signs. He just showed up and let God be God. And in that silence, he heard everything, not audibly, but deeper than that, in his bones, in his breath, in the quiet assurance that he wasn't alone. He never heard a voice, but he felt something stronger. Conviction, the kind that doesn't need proof, the kind that survives doubt, because it's not based on feelings. It's based on a person who never left, even when it felt like he did. Looking back, he saw it clearly. God hadn't abandoned him in the silence. God had been dismantling his dependence on feelings and building something stronger. Faith that didn't need constant reassurance. Faith that could stand when answers didn't come. Faith that said, "I don't understand, but I trust you anyway." That kind of faith can't be built in comfort, only in the furnace of unanswered prayer. He realized the silence was never punishment. It was preparation. Preparation for a faith that could handle real life, not just mountaintop moments. Because life isn't lived on mountains. It's lived in valleys. And silence teaches you to find God there. The silence taught him something else. That sometimes the deepest prayers have no words. Sometimes they're just presence. Showing up. Being there. Letting God love you when you have nothing to offer but your brokenness. That he learned is the purest prayer. The one that costs you everything and offers nothing. The one that says, "I am not enough, but you are." Months passed. The silence remained. But so did he. He stopped waiting for the silence to end and started living inside it. He discovered that silence, when you stop fighting it, becomes the loudest form of love because it says, "I trust you to handle this without explanations. I trust you to grow, even when it hurts. I'm not withholding answers. I'm teaching you to trust beyond them." And he learned, slowly, painfully, but he learned that heaven's silence isn't distance. It's intimacy too deep for words. That unanswered prayers aren't unheard. They're held, That when God seems far, he's doing his deepest work. This is what he learned in the silence. That faith isn't feeling God's presence. It's trusting he's present when you feel nothing. That silence isn't God leaving. It's God trusting you grow enough to stand when he feels distant. And sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't when God answers. It's when he's silent and you still believe. This isn't his story. It's yours. Because maybe heaven is silent for you right now too. And maybe that's exactly where your faith begins.